Right, welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, channel 147, Sirius XM. It is the Farmer Rapid Fire, a special one here on a Wednesday, brought to you by Pioneer Seeds Canada. And with Pioneer Seeds Canada, I've got with me Greg Stopps out of Ontario. Greg, how are you?
Great, Lyndsey. Thanks so much for having me back on.
Now, well, as we've heard on today's show, as well as, of course, just in the on the landscape, some pretty phenomenal corn yields out there. What are you hearing from your growers?
Yeah, we're seeing really record-breaking yields in a lot of areas. There's definitely some variability where you go, but most people, when it comes to corn, are pretty excited about how the fall went. The area that I cover, kind of along Lake Huron, has been a little bit ahead of maybe other parts of the province. We're basically wrapped up and done. It's hard to find a cornfield still out there in my travels. But tremendous yields. Growers were excited to get it off and get it off relatively dry this year in arguably drier and better harvest conditions than we typically expect.
Which is always nice when you're not going to leave the field a mess and maybe save on some drying costs. Those are always good things.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Now we did see though, and this is maybe something I want to spend a bit of time on today, tar spot, maybe not the yield robber this year it could have been, but definitely, a lot of growers asking questions about stalk strength and integrity, what impact this disease could have had. What are you hearing on the tar spot question? And then let's talk about maybe what we can do for next year. But what are you hearing out there?
Sure, yeah. Tar spot, for the area that I cover, again, it's finally moved in and really had a bit of an impact, right? We've seen it and heard about it south of London before in southwestern Ontario, where we've seen those big yield discrepancies, where you've seen the more tolerant genetics kind of stand up and show visible differences as well as yield differences, where we've seen fungicide management really kind of show big differences. Even between some of the different fungicides, you've seen differences. This year, though, tar spot has moved north of London, has really settled in. We've seen it at high pressure. Thankfully, I think reflective in the yields, we didn't see a whole lot of yield come out of our crop because of tar spot, but we saw those effects, those stalk integrity, late season stalk strength, and late season. I mean, we were harvesting in the middle of August or October, sorry, and so we weren't really late season. And had our fall been any different and we had to harvest later, I think we would have seen even more of that stock strength really come out. We were maybe blessed by some of the dry conditions that we had in August and September. Some of those same kind of drought conditions that probably punished a bit of our bean yields in southwestern Ontario really benefited our corn crop by facilitating good dry down. And while tar spot was present, I believe, as you look at the environment and you see how little leaf wetness we had, I could walk into a crop or into a plot or something like that at 9 in the morning and not be soaking wet. That's rare for our environment.
Yeah.
But the dry conditions really squeezed that disease triangle on the environment side and likely slowed tar spot up. So it did have an effect, but probably not as big of an effect or as rapid of an effect that we know can be associated with tar spot. So we're seeing it out there. We're seeing huge pressure from it. It's here. It's going to stay. It's going to overwinter. It's going to potentially threaten in years to come, especially earlier with early infection if the environment is there. And we've got to start thinking through that a little bit more, because I think we did honestly escape some of what we could have seen from a yield loss standpoint, certainly in the area north of London. There are pockets where we did see that yield loss, though. I don't want to ignore those for the growers who definitely experienced that. But we all have to start treating it that way in our management and in the decisions we make this winter.
So, and on that decision, there are genetic differences to this disease, but being relatively new, how, how do we answer that question as to making a choice on hybrid if tar spot is a concern?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to pay attention to the tar spot scores that are out there. At Pioneer, we're very confident in our ability to score tar spot. We've been kind of honing in on that within our research organization. We're really proud of the fact that our genetics and our germplasm show really pretty good tolerance to tar spot, but even then, in our commercial lineup of our hybrids, we have a range of performance differences. We try to be transparent about that, and it's important to talk to your rep about kind of those things. There are some hybrids that are exceptional on tar spot, and those are the ones that I'm going to gravitate to if I'm really nervous about tar spot or I've seen big yield differences in the past. But that isn't the only thing that's going to drive my hybrid decisions too, right? I mean, I've got to consider other things with agronomics, and what I would say is most of our lineup that performs really well compared to the industry, even some of those lower scores, may have things that are really attractive to fit your own operation. What you want to keep in mind then is that you have to partner that selection of genetics with management. And I would be very careful to say that that's not just on the stuff that scores lower on tar spot. You want to consider management on the stuff that performs really well on tar spot too. And how I like to kind of frame that for growers is, you know, management and specifically fungicide application and genetics go hand in hand with tar spot. I would maybe at this point argue that that fungicide piece does a lot of the heavy lifting for protecting initial yield development from kind of R1 to R3. I'd argue that it doesn't give you a huge amount of ROI beyond R3 at this stage, right? If you're applying the right product, though, you can do a lot of the heavy lifting in that time frame, and then your genetic tolerance really takes off and helps get you over the finish line from there, right? So partnering really good management doesn't with kind of correct hybrid genetic decision is really important, right? If you've got a hybrid that's a little more susceptible or a little less tolerant to tar spot, right, then you really have to focus in on the right timing, the right products, the right rates, and even consider potentially if the disease is going to continue at high pressure, maybe you need to plan for a second application. Partnering the right genetics, though, or really good tolerant genetics with the right management is also important. It's just you'll probably be able to get away with one application and then kind of let the genetics take over from there, right, would be the hope. I don't want to say that, you know, you should ever be able to just select the right genetics and forget the management portion of it, because this disease is not like that. It will, under high enough pressure, overwhelm even the most tolerant of genetics.
And as we've touched on, and as you mentioned, that environment component of that disease triangle, we typically do see far more moisture at a time, you know, that we didn't see this year. So as bad as it was, it could have been so much worse. And a more average year next year might mean way higher pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't remember a year in southwestern Ontario where middle of October we've seen fields come off at 19%, right? So normally our environment challenges us a lot more. Normally we're leaving more ruts in the field than we'd like. This has been a relatively unique year that I'm thankful for, but I can't expect going forward.
Yep. Okay. All right. Greg, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. So many decisions to make in the next couple weeks. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Lyndsey.